Hey everybody, it's Mr. N here, and this is some completing the square practice. These are just the basics of completing the square, nothing too complex yet. So let's look at it. Just a reminder, this is something you learned in Algebra 1, how to complete the square. And completing the square is a method used to make a non-factorable problem into one that is factorable. So suppose you had the expression over here, x squared plus 10x plus c. And we want to know for what value of c will the equation become a perfect square trinomial. What a perfect square trinomial is when I factor it, it'll be like x plus something squared, x minus something squared. So x plus or minus some number squared. That's what we're looking to do in this problem. So the process to do that is called completing the square. Now I've shown you, if you've taken Algebra 1, the visual methods of what this means, but in here we're just going to practice the basics, kind of like a review of the simpler parts of this. So the first question says, find the value of c that completes the square. Now to complete the square, the process we take is we will be taking this b value. You have ax squared plus bx plus c, and we'll take this b value. But remember, when we do a completing the square, we can't have a number there. We will try to eliminate that number so this won't be there. But in any case, we're going to take this b, this value, divide it by 2. So we could say 1/2 of b. That's what that means. And then we're going to take that value of 1/2 of b and we're going to square it. So we'll take whatever b over 2 ended up being and we square it. And that's what that c value will be. So over here, what I'm saying is you take this 6, take half of it. So 6 over 2 gives me 3. And now to get the c value, I'm going to take the 3 and I'm going to square it, so that gives me 9. So that's the value of c that I'm looking for. So you take 1/2 of the b value and then square it. Now, what happens when you do that? Well, if I end up with this x squared plus 6x plus 9, it factors into a perfect square trinomial, which will be x plus 3 quantity squared. It's whatever it was when you divided it by the 2, whatever value you got here, that's what's going to end up being right there. So then for number 2, we're looking at the 12 here. That's the b value with the x, so we'll take half of that. So that's 6, so 12 over 2. And then we're going to take our 6 and we're going to square it. We'll get 36, which will be our value for c. So again, you're taking 1/2 of this, divide by 2, and then you take that answer and you square it. So if you factored this out, it would be x plus 6 quantity squared. All right, and finally, for this last example that we have here, the b value is -7, so we're going to say -7 divided by 2, so half of that. And then we're going to take this answer and square it, so we'll get 49 over 4. So we're just going to keep it in this form, and then if you factored this, you would get a minus 7 over 2 quantity squared. So for the next set of problems, let's take a look at what we have. We're going to solve these by completing the square. So the process is the same. You're going to take that b value, you're going to divide it by 2, then you're going to square it. But we're going to do one thing a little bit different for these. So let's first find out this b value. It's -2. So we're going to take half of that, so divided by 2, you'll get -1. Now take your -1 and square it, you get +1. All right, so this is how I'm going to rewrite this. Now, there's two ways to do this. Since we're solving these, you could bring this over to that side, and that's the method I suggest, but there is a way to just keep it on this side, but I'm going to show you the other way. So, we're going to rewrite this as x squared minus 2x equals 2. So I added 2 to each side. So now what I want to do is I want to say x squared minus 2x plus blank equals 2 plus blank. Because whatever I add to this left side, to keep this equation balanced, I need to add that same thing to the right side. Well, what I add to that side is that c value like I solved up above. So this will be x squared minus 2x, and I solved for it right there. Plus 1 equals 2 plus 1. So that's the number that goes in the blank. It's this 1 value that I found right here, right there. Okay? So it has to go on each side. Now on this left side, I go ahead and I factor it, and this shouldn't be too bad because it's, remember, what it was when you divided it by 2, which was negative 1. So x minus 1 squared equals 2 plus 1 is 3. At this point, to solve this, I'm going to take the square root of each side. So plus or minus the square root of 3, because I took the square root here, took the square root there, and you need plus or minus. So then x will be, add 1 to each side, 1 plus or minus the square root of 3. All right, let's look at the second one. So we're going to say x squared plus 8x. We're going to bring this one over to the other side, so add 1 to each side. I'm going to say plus blank equals 1 plus blank. Now we've got to determine what value goes in the blank by completing the square. So half of 8 will give you 4. Take that 4 and square it. You're going to get 16. So that's the number that's going to go into this right here. It'll be 16. Now when we go back to this and I factor, it's what it was when I divided it by 2. So it'll be x plus 4 quantity squared equals 17. And we can finish solving from there by taking the square root of each side, which square root here, square root there. This will give me x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 17. So x will be, subtract 4 from each side, negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 17. All right, moving on to the next problem. Over here, notice I have a 2 in front. What I need to do is I always want this to be a 1. I can't really complete the square on this if that's not a 1. So what I'll simply do is just divide everything by 2. That'll give me x squared minus x minus 2 equals, well, 0 divided by 2 is still 0. Some teachers will tell you to factor the 2 out and then divide by 2, which is the same process. So over here, we're going to say x squared minus x plus blank, add 2 to each side, will give me 2 plus blank. And now I need to figure out what goes in that blank. I'll take this negative 1 right here, divide by 2, and then I'll have negative 1/2, which I square, and I'll get positive 1/4. So that's the number that goes in the blank, this positive 1/4 number. I continue to factor this now. On the left side, I'll get x minus, again, it's whatever it was when you divided it by 2. So that'll be x minus 1/2 squared. On this side, I'm going to get 2 and 1/4. And I'll rewrite this to be 9/4. So now I'm going to say x minus 1/2, and I take the square root of each side. Remember, I wrote it to be 9/4. And the square root of 9/4 is going to be plus or minus, well, the square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2. So I'll get that. Now I can add 1/2 to each side. And on this one, I can simplify it a little further. On these, notice you had a square root, so you really couldn't do much with it. But on these, I can simplify it a little further. I could say 1/2 plus 3/2, which would give me 4/2, which is 2, so x equals 2. And then the other one would be 1/2 minus 3/2, which would give me negative 2/2, which is and negative 1. So now let's move on to number 7. And on number 7, again, I have a 3 out in front of this, and I don't want that 3. I need a 1 out in front, so I'm going to divide everything by 3. So that goes away. That'll give me x squared, and negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4x plus 1/3 equals 0. So now at this point, I'm going to say x squared minus 4x plus blank equals negative 1/3 plus blank, because I brought this over to the other side. Take the negative 4 divided by 2, so half of that would give me negative 2. Negative 2 squared would give me positive 4. So that's the number that will go into the blank there. I'll put a 4 here and a 4 there. All right, moving on with this, I'm going to factor this. Oh, let's go back to that blue color. So that'll give me x minus 2 squared, because that's what it was here, equals, this will be 3 and 2/3. So now I'm going to rewrite this as 11/3, and I'll take the square root of each side. So this will give me x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 11/3, which doesn't break down, so I'll say x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 11/3. Now you can rationalize this and make this root 33 over 3, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to leave it like this for now. All right, moving on to the last question. And on the last question here, we've got the same situation. We need to divide everything by 2. So that'll give me x squared plus 5x equals negative 17 halves. So x squared plus 5x plus the blank equals negative 17 halves plus blank. Take your 5 divided by 2, half of it, and then square it. You'll get 25 over 4. 25 over 4, 25 over 4. So you'll get x plus 5 over 2 quantity squared equals, and then this is going to be negative 34 over 4 plus 25 over 4. Well, this is going to give me a non-real answer, and here's how I know why. Because in Algebra 2, you'll go ahead and solve for this with imaginary numbers, but for now, we'll get a non-real answer, because if I take the square root of each side, I'll have the square root of a negative number, and we don't know how to do that yet, so right now we're just going to write non-real answer. In Algebra 2 and higher, you will be able to solve for that, but not for this exercise right here. I just wanted to show you what happens if you do get a negative for now. All right, so hopefully this reminded you of how to do these completing the square problems. Just a good little review, and make sure you hit that subscribe button, make sure you hit that like button, and see you in the next video.